DeFi was supposed to dismantle the gatekeepers, while putting governance on a blockchain would finally strip insiders of the power they wielded inside the legacy banking cartel. But the largest publicly known investor in a politically endorsed multi-billion-dollar DeFi project just accused that very project of secretly embedding a backdoor blacklisting function into its smart contract, freezing 545 million of his tokens and operating the entire venture as a personal ATM for the family of a sitting US president. The official response from the project was mind-boggling, and the structural evidence sitting on-chain right now is being openly compared by serious analysts to the precise architecture that destroyed FTX and Alameda Research in 2022. My name is DC, and you're watching The Coin Bureau. WLFI Financial is a DeFi protocol and stablecoin issuer publicly backed by Donald Trump and his family. Launched in October 2024 through a pre-sale of its WLFI token that raised approximately $590 million across 2 rounds. The project's so-called gold paper explicitly entitles a Trump family-owned entity called DT Marks DeFi LLC to 75% of all net protocol revenues after operating expenses. Donald Trump's own federal disclosure, signed in June 2025, reported over $57 million in personal income from WLFI Finance token sales covering only the late 2024 period. Reuters then estimated that the Trump family extracted approximately $460 million from WLFI Financial in the first half of 2025 alone, with cumulative venture revenue surpassing $1 billion by December 2025. Now, the project issues 2 main assets, the WLFI governance token and the USD1 stablecoin, the latter of which has grown to a circulating supply of roughly $4.4 billion, with Binance custodying nearly 87% of that float as of February 2026. You see, this is not a small experimental project on the fringes of crypto. This is a structurally significant venture with deep institutional integrations, a sovereign wealth fund, and a pending application before the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency for a National Trust Bank charter under the proposed name WLFI Trust Company. And yet, despite that scale and political backing, WLFI currently trades at approximately 8 cents per token, having collapsed roughly 76% from its September 2025 all-time high of 33 cents. Its market cap sits at approximately $2.5 billion, and on the 14th of April this year, Binance added WLFI to its monitoring tag list, which is the signal that a token is at risk of delisting from the exchange. To put it simply, the most politically connected DeFi project in history is currently trading at a fraction of its peak valuation, while the exchange that custodies the overwhelming majority of its sister stablecoin is publicly flagging it as a delisting candidate. And the reason for that collapse begins with a transaction that went live in early April this year on a lending platform called Dolomite. The mechanics of what happened on Dolomite are the cleanest single illustration of why structural compromise in crypto is something you can identify in real time before the collapse rather than after it. In early April, the WLFI Financial Treasury deposited approximately 5 billion of its own WLFI tokens, representing roughly 5% total supply as collateral on the Dolomite lending protocol. Against that collateral, the project then borrowed approximately $75 million in stablecoins, specifically $65.4 million in USD1, which is their own stablecoin, and a further $10.3 million in USDC. The borrowing pushed Dolomite's USD1 lending pool to between 93 and 100% utilization, which in plain English means that other depositors in that pool could no longer withdraw their funds. Over $40 million of the borrowed stablecoins was then transferred to Coinbase Prime. And on the 13th of April, the project minted an additional $25 million in fresh USD1 tokens while burning only $3 million. Now, here's the critical conflict of interest sitting at the center of this transaction. Dolomite was co-founded by an individual named Corey Kaplan, who simultaneously serves as the technical advisor and de facto chief technology officer of WLFI Financial. This means the project deposited its own illiquid governance tokens as collateral on a lending venue controlled by its own insider borrowed stablecoins denominated in its own ecosystem and used those borrowed funds to manage the resulting liquidity crunch by minting more of its own stablecoin. And as a few media outlets inside and outside of crypto have pointed out, that's some FTX Alameda vibes right there. You'll recall that Alameda Research borrowed against FTT token on FTX, while World Liberty borrowed against its own illiquid WLFI token on Dolomite. Now, if the price of the collateral token falls, forced liquidation cascades through the lending platform and creates bad debt for every other depositor. And the killer data point here comes from BubbleMap's chief executive, Nicholas Wyman, who quantified the illiquidity problem in startling terms. Selling just $8.2 million of WLFI on the open market would cause approximately 72% slippage, meaning the collateral that backs 3/4 of the borrowed sum cannot be safely liquidated without catastrophically crashing its own price. The project has dismissed all of this as FUD, describing themselves as an anchor borrower generating yield for other depositors and insisting they are nowhere near liquidation because they can simply post additional collateral if needed. But the additional collateral they could post is more illiquid WLFI tokens, which is precisely the circular logic that defines the structural vulnerability in the first place. Now, before we get into how the largest outside investor in the project responded to all of this, staying ahead of these structural red flags before they translate into devastating losses is exactly why the Coin Bureau Telegram channel exists. This is where we share the latest breaking news the moment it lands, where we provide deep dive alpha on emerging risks across DeFi protocols, exchanges, and stablecoin issuers, and where we deliver the most important market updates straight to your device so you never miss a critical signal. Whether it is an exchange monitoring tag, an on-chain liquidity warning, or a regulatory action that the broader market has not yet priced in. You can sign up today using the link in the description below or by scanning the QR code currently displayed on your screen. Right, let us return now to what happened when World Liberty tried to apply this same control architecture to one of its most prominent investors. Justin Sun, the founder of Tron Blockchain, invested approximately $75 million into World Liberty Financial during the pre-sale rounds and was given a formal advisor role. At the September 2025 peak, his combined holdings, including unvested tokens, were valued at close to $700 million. Then on the 4th of September last year, Sun's wallet, which holds approximately 545 million WLFI tokens, was blacklisted and frozen by administrative function inside the WLFI smart contract. The freeze was triggered following an attempted transfer of roughly 9 million from his wallet, and Sun received no notice and no documented due process. Now, fast forward to April 12th this year, and Sun went public on X with a series of escalating allegations that have reshaped the conversation around this project entirely. He alleged that the team secretly embedded a backdoor blacklisting function in the WLFI token contract that allows insiders to unilaterally freeze, restrict, or confiscate any holder's assets at will. He was technically specific, identifying the control structure as a 3 of 5 anonymous multisig wallet combined with a single external account owned by an anonymous guardian that holds unilateral ban authority. Justin Sun described the governance as theater, claimed that key votes were predetermined before they were cast, called the structure world tyranny, and described himself as the first and largest victim of the backdoor mechanism. He characterized the entire venture as a trap masqueraded as a door, and his frozen tokens, once worth approximately $107 million, are now valued at roughly $42 million, a paper loss exceeding $80 million for him personally. The project's response posted to X on the 12th of April was as follows, and I quote, "We have the contracts, we have the evidence, we have the truth. See you in court, pal." Now, Sun is also a quite polarizing figure in crypto. He paid a $10 million fine to the United States Securities and Exchange Commission in March 2026, with his fraud charges dismissed with prejudice just weeks before he turned on the project. But here's why the credibility question matters less than people assume. The structural evidence Sun describes, the multisig architecture, the anonymous guardian account, the blacklisting function, is all verifiable on-chain by anyone with the technical capacity to read a smart contract. The allegations are either true or they are not, completely independent of who is making them. And reports indicate that the same administrative wallet that holds the blacklisting power is the same executing the Dolomite borrowing strategy, meaning a single concentrated point of control governs both treasury operations and the unilateral ability to freeze any participant in the protocol. Now, you might assume that even if such a backdoor exists, decentralized governance would provide a meaningful check on its abuse, right? That assumption completely collapses when you look at the data from the March 2026 governance vote, which revealed that just 10 wallets controlled 76% of all voting power in the WLFI governance system. The identities behind those 10 controlling wallets, of course, remain undisclosed. In that same vote, a proposal to require WLFI tokens to be staked for 180 days before qualifying for governance participation passed with 99.12% approval, a supermajority that, when combined with the 76% concentration, is not evidence of consensus, but rather the sort of voting outcome you get in places like North Korea. And then, on the 15th of April this year, the project published the proposal that critics are now calling a $1.5 billion extraction scheme. The proposal restructures the vesting terms for approximately 62.28 billion WLFI tokens currently in various locked states. For insiders, founders, team members, advisors, and partners holding around 45.24 billion tokens collectively, the new terms include a 2-year cliff followed by a 3-year linear vesting, paired with a burn of 4.52 billion tokens, which sounds significant but represents only roughly 10% of the insider allocation and approximately 4.5% of the total supply. Holders are given a 10-day window to affirmatively opt into the new schedule. Those who do not opt in remain locked under the original terms, which in many cases means indefinitely locked with no clear path to liquidity. Sun called the proposal one of the most absurd governance scams he has ever seen. And he noted that because his tokens remain frozen, he has been excluded from voting on the very proposal that affects those frozen assets. The 2-year cliff means insiders begin receiving liquidity in approximately April 2028, still inside the Trump presidency window, which ends in January 2029. The alignment between the vesting cliff and the political insurance window is, to put it mildly, conspicuous. And this brings us directly to the regulatory and legal front, which is escalating with extraordinary speed. Senators Richard Blumenthal, Elizabeth Warren, and Sheldon Whitehouse have all called for federal investigations into the venture. In November 2025, Warren and Senator Jack Reed sent a formal letter to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Attorney General Pam Bondi, demanding a federal investigation into allegations that World Liberty sold governance tokens to entities linked to the Lazarus Group of North Korea, Russian sanctioned evasion platforms, Iranian exchanges, and the OFAC-sanctioned Tornado Cash protocol. In January this year, Warren sent a separate letter to OCC Comptroller Jonathan Gold, demanding a halt to the World Liberty Trust Company charter application until President Trump divests his financial interests, warning Gold directly that he could become an accomplice to the corruption if the charter is approved. So pulling all of this together produces a transferable analytical framework, a checklist of 5 structural red flags that will outlive this specific project and apply to every comparable token launch you encounter going forward. First, insider-controlled lending venues, where a project deposits its own collateral into a lending platform run by its own personnel, eliminating the arm's-length oversight that lending markets are supposed to provide. Second, circular collateral structures where a self-issued illiquid token is used to borrow assets denominated in or supporting the same closed ecosystem, creating a self-reinforcing loop with no external capital injection. Third, governance concentration, where a small number of typically anonymous wallets hold the majority of voting power, rendering decentralization a marketing facade rather than operational reality. Fourth, backdoor administrative functions, where smart contracts contain pause, blacklist, or asset freeze capabilities controlled by a small group of signers with no time locks and no community governance constraints. And fifth, vesting restructures with artificial deadlines where short opt-in windows combined with coercive default consequences signal liquidity stress, insider exit pressure, or an attempt to suppress market clearing supply during a moment of maximum political leverage. Every one of these 5 red flags is independently visible in the World Liberty financial case, and every one of them is verifiable on-chain or in publicly filed regulatory documents before any catastrophic failure event occurs. The reality is that the political branding around this project is the loudest signal, but also the least informative one. The on-chain mechanics are quieter, more technical, and far more predictive, and they tell the same story that the crypto industry has watched play out repeatedly over the last 7 years. Whether you believe Justin Sun, whether you believe the Trump family, or whether you believe neither, the architecture of this project independently confirms a pattern that has historically resolved exactly one way. So the biggest questions is what the regulatory response actually looks like when this resolves, what it means for federal stablecoin oversight under the Genius Act framework, and whether the industry uses this moment to demand structural standards that would have prevented the entire scenario in the first place. So, will the federal regulators finally enforce meaningful structural standards on tokenized financial products before the next compromised launch arrives? Or will the political insulation around this specific venture allow the same 5 red flags to repeat across the next generation of insider-controlled DeFi protocols? Let me know exactly where you stand in the comments down below. And if you want to understand how the broader stablecoin regulatory environment is being reshaped by the Genius Act and the OCC's new digital asset chartering rules, you should definitely check out our deep dive video right over here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon. This is DC signing